you start out like going to art school or being in a punk band or whatever, because you're a little bit like, I went to art school because I didn't want to be a business guy, right? And then the irony really is like, you all of a sudden that's what you have to be, in a sense, because there's no point in school where we really even talked about. I mean, they do a little bit, like they allude to the fact that you're going to have to make money, right? The real business side of it, you don't really understand until later, and you're like, shit, like I don't want to do this, but I have to.
Welcome to Codec Projects Podcast, episode 10. Can you believe we made it to 10? This episode, we have Jared Souney. I've known Jared probably since the early 90s. When I first met him, I just knew him as a really good flatland BMX rider. Since then, he's gone on to do some really great things within the BMX community and industry, and beyond that as well. He's an artist, he's a photographer, he has a clothing company. He's got his hands in a lot of things. So sit back and enjoy.
My name is Jared Souney. I'm a photographer and a designer, I guess. I do a lot of both, and I don't know. I guess you could call me a media person, and just, I usually tend to gravitate towards designer or photographer.
Okay, and you have a book out called Things Seen Along the Way, and to me that seems, I was going through it and the way you have it structured, it's basically BMX photography from 94 to 2014. Is that correct?
Yeah, that just sort of like, when I started going through everything and it started turning into a book, that was the period where I was kind of like most involved in everything BMX, yeah. I guess.
Yeah.
And I started riding BMX bikes in like 1984, I guess. So I was like 9, and I didn't pick up a camera until years later, but
yeah.
So a lot of that time isn't really documented in there. It's pretty much from when I picked up a camera to 2014, which is kind of, I mean, I still shoot BMX a little bit, but it just over time just kind of fizzled to a little less, just based on who I was hanging out with and things like that.
Right. So it's like that was kind of your prime, I guess,
yeah.
quote unquote professional.
Yeah.
Time.
Like just as far as like kind of doing it and submitting photos places and considering that to be what I was doing,
Right. I don't even know where you would submit photos to nowadays. Anyways.
Exactly. And I mean, even at the latter stuff in that book, like the, probably 2010 to 2014, a lot of that stuff just kind of appeared on the internet at that point. So
right.
I think this was also an opportunity to use some of it in another way for me.
Okay.
And a lot of people never saw it or whatever. So it was cool to kind of go back through all that and give some of it a place. Even some of the older stuff, like the earliest stuff, never got published either because I wasn't.
Yeah.
Something I was focused on, or it just was kind of like stuff that got thrown in a box. So
right.
Need to put all that together and
I'm sorry. No, I was going to say that. So the early stuff to me is, I'm a little bit biased so the way you have the book structured, it's your New England to California to State College, Pennsylvania, correct?
Yep.
And then, which is the part I wasn't super aware of. And then, Portland and being from New England, the New England stuff, a lot of, I recognize a lot of faces. I'll be honest. I spend a lot of time looking at the New England stuff. Right. And I got the book. I'll be totally straight up with you. I got the book. I don't know. When did you ship them out? Like I feel like I've had it for over a month.
Yeah, it would have been like August or September, probably. I guess.
Yeah, it came in this awesome box, great packaging, and the label says, sealed for radness, and it was like such a cool label. I didn't want to break it open, so I put it in my office, which is in shambles right now, and I didn't break it open until yesterday because
oh, wow.
well I was debating whether or not I even wanted to open it because
I get it, because it's like, it's a sealed thing. Like, should I open it?
well, sealed. There's only 250 of them, and
Yeah.
I was like, well, maybe I'll make another one. Maybe I should hold on to it. And then I was like, no, I got to look at it. I'm going to talk to him. And I it's not that I wanted to look at it, but it was one of those things where I was like, do I break the seal? It says right on it to break it, but
Right. And
but
that was one of those like last minute. So none of that project was planned at all, and it just, when I got to the point I was going to put it in a box, I was like, okay, now something's got to be on the box, or it doesn't finish. It's cool, like simple way to do it and make it feel like something more.
right. That was just that was one of that was the stupid like collector
Exactly.
thing in me. I'm like, do I break it? But in the end, I usually always end up doing that. I don't really keep many things sealed.
It's funny, when I was working on this, I had an old. You remember Skatebook?
Yeah.
So that was, I want to say mid 2000s. It was like essentially a magazine in hardcover book format that they made a couple times a year or whatever.
Yeah.
And ultimately they got sued by, I think, Fox or something for doing a Simpsons cover. So it shut
really?
down.
Okay.
But so I had that Simpsons cover book on my shelf unopened, and when I was working on this, I actually cracked into it because I wanted to look through it. I had never looked at that issue before. So.
Yeah. So I'm getting at. Yeah, I've had similar. I'm trying to think. I've had things in the past where I kept them unopened for so long, and then one day I just decided to open them, and then I found out later it was like it was a real bad move.
Right.
Like financially, anyways, if you care about that. But
a lot of that stuff you never expect to have any sort of real value.
Right. Well, anyways, so what I was getting at before I derailed myself was that the way you have this book set up, starting in New England, like I think that's a good place to start. Like you said, you were saying how you started riding BMX in '87 and got into photography. You want to just quickly take us along that? Let's start with New England. How did all that come to be?
Yeah, I think it was probably like '84 that I started riding, and then just through some kids in the neighborhood kind of thing. And there weren't a lot of them. There was like one or two others, and it just kind of happened that I also lived in the next town over from Joe Johnson, who lived in Stoughton, and so there were a couple older guys that were part of Joe's crew, and I think just having that, I wouldn't really call it a full scene or anything, but it was just having that around probably exposed me to things and kept me interested, I guess.
Yeah.
And ultimately that's definitely what got me interested in photography. Just going to, I can remember being at Joe's house when he first started getting in the magazines, and Wendy Osborne coming out to shoot, and just being like, whoa, that's like pretty cool. Like, that's how you do this. Like, that's where magazines come from.
And that was that's a legendary photo shoot, really, for anyone.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And you don't, obviously at the time, no one there is thinking we're going to be talking about it 30 years later.
Right. Except for and I don't know. Yeah. Maybe, I don't know if you guys, from what I hear, they didn't go that far to shoot riders typically. They must have been really impressed by it.
Well, it would be, and I certainly learned more about it years later when I worked for a magazine, but it would be like Wendy wasn't out there to shoot Joe. Wendy was out there because she was out there to do 8 things at once, and one of them was go shoot. It was probably, I don't remember how it coincided, but it was probably around one of those AFA contests or something that was in Massachusetts or New Hampshire. And Joe was just like a day later or something like that, Right.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because it's pretty rare that at any point.
Yeah, to have that kind of budget to do that.
One thing, so.
Yeah.
But just seeing, and at that point, someone's really good, but you don't know. We didn't have a lot to compare it to other than videos, so.
Right.
um, it was, I guess it was neat to see someone like Joe get coverage from back there at that time, because no one was, like you said, like the magazine's shot in Southern California. So it was like, he must be like legitimately good
Yeah.
if they're bothered, if they're here to do this. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And so how did you get into, I mean, obviously riding, takes you stayed riding and you just fall kind of along what's going on there. But how did you get into shooting photos?
Um, yeah, I mean, like like you said, I stayed riding the whole time. And I mean, even all these years later, I still ride a bike. But I think the photos, again, that was seeing Wendy shoot and being at other contests and seeing other photographers and stuff, that kind of got me interested. And then ultimately, I probably picked up a camera in the probably, I guess, early 90s, but I didn't have any idea what I was doing. And then when I went to college in Boston, I finally got a little more serious about it and started learning how to actually expose things and that sort of thing. So the stuff you see early in the book from New England is all that kind of era. Like at that point, I had a hand-me-down camera from my parents and just would go and buy film, and sometimes it would come back all black, and sometimes it would be good. But the challenging part was the stuff that was good. I never really knew why it turned out good.
Yeah.
So it was like it was definitely a hard learning curve at that point, because there weren't a lot of photographers around. There wasn't internet boards everywhere to just look something up real quick. And even in college, like none of the photo instructors had any idea how to shoot action. It was more like focused on fine art, portrait stuff, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I remember taking a photography class and trying to go out and shoot skateboarding, and I just kind of gave up with it. With film, I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out black and white, let alone color. That was a whole.
Yeah. I'd ask like guys at the camera shop and stuff that I'd go to, and a lot of the information I got was like, sort of right, but also like not right.
Yeah.
Like they'd push, like trying to figure out how to shoot action and make it really work. They'd push me towards like faster films, like 1600 or 3200 film stocks, which are great for low light and using high shutter speeds. But it wasn't really the solution to my problem, because then you just end up with really grainy photos. And, I don't know. So there was a lot of stuff like that. Like just
you had to really want it back then, I think.
Yeah, sometimes you were asking the wrong people, and then you got led down a path that wasn't necessarily right. So a lot of experimenting, and like all of us played with all sorts of things. Like I played with video at the time, and making little zines and stuff like that. So I think it all kind of helped learn. Each one of those little things helped the other a little bit, I guess.
Right. And then, so you mentioned, so was Low Fat the zine you did with? Did you do that with Tunney?
Yeah,
with Brian Tunney?
that was a little video zine that I did. That was with Sean Marr.
Yeah.
And I worked on the first couple of those, and then Muggleston kind of just Sean and I were both busy, and I was going to school, and I don't know what Sean was doing, but at some point Muggleston just kind of started just cranking them out. Like he did that Massholes video, which was sort of a low fat, but not totally a low fat.
Okay.
But that was just the idea of that was just like a video zine, like kind of like what Props was doing at the time, and 411. And
yeah.
But we were just trying to show our segment of that.
Right.
Props had their, like you were talking about with the magazines, like Props had their network of people that would be in it a lot, and from being from New England that it's almost isolated up there to where people don't really travel through New England a lot on road trips per se. So
yeah, it's definitely,
you didn't see a lot of outside action from other places unless there were contests.
Yeah, definitely back then, if you saw anything from New England that you recognized, it was a big deal.
Yeah. I mean, and we had, we had like localized events and stuff, but at that point, um, a lot of anything that was being made in New England was essentially just little stuff coming out of New England. Like Kieran Chapman was doing Radazine and Wire, things like that. And without those, like, I don't know what we really would have had coverage wise.
Right. And then you created you made an actual magazine though too, didn't you?
Yeah, we did. So after Low Fat was a little earlier. Low Fat was like, let's see, that would be like 90 or mid 90s, like 94, 95 maybe.
Okay.
It was definitely earlier. And then a few years later, Brian Tunney and I did a magazine called 990, which was
that's what I was thinking of.
That came out in 98. So Low Fat would have probably been like 3 years before that.
Okay.
But 990 was like right on the edge of when I started figuring out how to actually use a camera. And I already had a job at a little magazine in Boston. So I was learning like how to put it all together and had some resources. And that was what evolved out of that, I guess.
Okay. And then did 990 lead to, like, how did you get hooked up with working with Ride? Or was that, is that even, how did you get like involved with shooting actual photos that were being used within the BMX industry in general? I mean,
that would be like, so around that, like, I guess like I don't want to say peak, but like the point I was riding the hardest was probably about right around that 990 era. So like late 90s. And at that point, like I was getting a little bit of exposure myself. Like the magazines would come out here and there and I'd get, Losi would take a picture or something. And so I knew some of those guys from just traveling around to contests and being a bike rider myself. And then as I started understanding my camera more, obviously your friends are the first people you take pictures of, right? So
right.
I would shoot with all those guys. And then at that same point in time, the X Games were starting to pick up, and Kevin Robinson was getting pretty good, and he was sponsored at that point by Hoffman Bikes, and so there was some use for photos there essentially. So I think my first like legitimate published photo BMX wise would probably be a photo of Kevin for a Hoffman ad, which is actually in the book. It's like a no-footed can photo kind of early on Act Park. But that was sort of what it just kind of evolved. It was like I did that, then I was understanding more, and then we did 990, and some people saw that, and that's ultimately probably what got me the job at Ride after that, which is kind of a double-edged sword because that, like, I got the job at Ride, but it also killed 990 in the process. So who knows what that would have.
Right. Which is fun. I kind of had a similar situation with 4-in-1, because me and Sean Mayer were doing the 650, which I remember that. Yeah, which you guys wrote up for us in Ride, and as we were going to put that out, we got off for the 4-in-1 gig, so it was almost very similar in a way.
Yeah, and I don't know, it's one of those things like you got it, like a job at a bike magazine at that point was like my
dream.
Yeah, it really was, and so I would have been, I would still contend. I would have been stupid not to do it. Like I had to.
Right.
And I had to do, like, at that point in my life, like I wanted to live in California, because I'd seen it growing up in skate bike magazines and everything, and you had to live in California still because the internet was kind of fledgling and people weren't transferring digital.
It was the dream. I mean, it was the dream. I think all of us dreamed about that.
So it was. I mean, it was awesome. It was a good. It certainly gave me a chance to learn photography more too, just by the fact that that was what I was doing for a job. So I just kind of had to learn more.
And I mean, so you got to work with like with Losi and some of the other guys. I'm sure maybe they showed you some more things like.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, it was like, there weren't a lot of BMX photographers at that point in time. Like it was like, it was Losi, Brad McDonald, who really wasn't shooting anymore. He was just kind of more behind the scenes.
Right.
And then Keith Mulligan worked there. And then we had all kinds of contributors. So like beyond that, there was like Steve Buddendeck and Ike Taylor. There were a few guys around, but it was like
they're more free.
The best guys worked. So it was certainly those were people to learn from. And we also we got bought by Transworld at one point, so we were kind of meshing with some of the skate guys, and it was good to be out there. There was just a lot of learning opportunity to be around people, and just the more you shoot, the more you learn. So,
right.
Plus, I had access to a full refrigerator full of film and processing, and plus, there's something to be said for having something to use the photos for. Like, people are gonna jump on shooting with you if there's a chance they're gonna get the magazine or something, But if you're just some kid in New England that just has a camera, like what's the point?
Yeah, no, definitely, I can relate to that.
And not to say they're going to be dicks about it, but it does give you a little bit more of a boost when to go up to people you don't know and shoot with them, because there's kind of a reason at that point. So,
well, yeah, it's just kind of instant credibility, and they're going to try a little bit harder to give you something if they think someone's going to see it.
Yeah, for sure. But I think, there's no doubt, just there were a lot of amazing riders in New England at that point. There still are.
Oh yeah.
But just guys that no one knew about because of the sort of isolation factor. And it was neat to be able to get some of them in the magazine, but it was also good to have those guys around early on, because if you can get awesome photos of someone jumping off a curb, but you're not really going to look at it the same as if it's really good bike riding. You know what I mean?
Oh, definitely. You helped each other out, and it must have been. I was going to say it must have been awesome to be able to get some of those guys in Ride, that would never have maybe been seen otherwise.
Yeah, I certainly wish I could have gotten more New England coverage out of it, but again, it's the times I got back there were
winter, probably.
Funny enough, they were usually winter, and they were just kind of grouped in with something else. So I wasn't there for a week to hang out. I was there passing through for a day,
right.
Just shoot with whoever was available. But yeah, it was good to get some of those guys noticed, and again, it was good to use some of those old photos in the book and just put those photos out there. But also it was neat to look at some of the guys that are still around from 94, and a lot of them are. So it's Jim Kavanaugh has photos in there from probably 20 years apart. So that's kind of neat to think about.
Yeah.
Look at.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, what was I going to ask you? I'm having a brain fart. So you were saying, I'm having a total brain fart right now. I'm going to have to cut this out. Oh, I know exactly what I was to ask you. You didn't just shoot photos though for Ride. You were doing other things, or am I wrong? I'm pretty sure you were doing a little bit of everything.
You're right. Well, so it's funny because when I got the job at Ride, I in no way looked at myself as a photographer. I was just I was going to design school, and I was working for a magazine in Boston called Stuff, which was owned at that time by the Boston Phoenix. So at that point I saw myself as a designer. I was designing magazines and photography for me was like, I always wanted to be able to do both so that I could like use my photos and stuff I was designing and that kind of thing.
Right.
And, yeah. So when I got the Ride job, I was sort of more a designer, and I was there primarily to just shoot photos and write, because in those kind of magazines, like there is no budget. So
right. You got to do kind
Los
of everything.
I was the associate editor, and we just did everything.
Right.
So I was writing, and the one thing I wasn't doing on the magazine for the most part was designing, which is what I like to do the most. But it was just there was someone else doing it. So
right.
It was that was, I guess, a little strange to like not have any involvement in that. Going from like I was like fully designing the magazine before that stuff in Boston, and then going into Ride, you're just handing it off to someone else. So it's but I did design a few things there.
Yeah, I mean, did you ever get any? I mean, was there like collaboration there, or?
Yeah, for sure. But the one person that was, most of us were in the office, but the one person when I was there that wasn't in the office was the designer. So we had Ali Ziegler was doing it when I first started there, who actually at the time was dating and living with Dick Day from Pigpen.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You guys will remember, which that was just a total random, like, small world thing.
Right.
And then after that, an agency in San Francisco did it for a little while I was there. This guy, Holden Hume, who had done other stuff in the industry, but
the name's
so because they were out of the office, the collaboration was a little different than it would be normally in that case, I guess.
Right.
It's kind of like handing it off and making some notes and that kind of thing. But at the same time, like, that was, at that point in time, the magazines were kind of at their height page count wise. Like, we had some over 200 page magazines while I was there, and they were monthly. So
right.
I there's no way I could have done
all that stuff. Yeah.
But wanted to, but I did design a couple things when I was there, like just like a kink road trip article that I went on that I was kind of attached to, and just a few other like a Day Smith interview and things, just kind of here and there, but wasn't my role there. But,
right.
Yeah. But again, it's good to get that experience doing something else, because I still do a lot of those things. So.
Right. And then, so you were there from when did you start and when did you leave?
I was there 99 to 2000, like middle of 2001.
Okay.
So, yeah, which was you'd call it mid school, I guess. And just, it was just like the black bike era, essentially. Like,
yeah.
Everything was really dark at that point.
Yeah. No. Yeah. It's funny because to me, I think of that as mid to new school, but I think most kids nowadays would call that old school.
Yeah, I guess
it's all relevant, I guess.
People ask that all the time, like what's what, but I always kind of define mid school as like the standard era.
As soon as you got rid of quill stems.
For me, it's kind of to when Mira stopped competing.
Yeah.
Just like that kind of breaks it for me, because that was like, I don't know, everything just felt different after that. But I don't know. So I guess my whole era in there was pretty mid-school focused, other than the old school stuff early on.
Okay. But, and what happened to prompt the change?
At Ride, you mean?
Or in general, however you want to address it. I don't.
In terms of why don't know Ride, is that what you mean?
Yeah, I honestly don't actually even know myself.
It wasn't. It was. There's a lot of reasons, and I mean, one of them probably does come down to a little bit of like the fact that I wasn't doing the art direction stuff, and I liked doing that stuff, but also just like a little bit of, man, I think in the 2 years that I was there, the magazine got bought probably at least 3 times, maybe 4.
Ooh.
Because that was a really strange time in the industry, because everything was starting. The X Games had kind of blown up, and there was money being thrown around, and the magazines had circulations like they hadn't had in the past, and page counts were huge. So the magazines were actually doing well. So by the time I left, we were owned by AOL Time Warner, which can be a good thing resource wise, but it kind of changed a lot of things with as the company got bigger. And my vision of where I thought the magazine should go, I guess, kind of differed from other people's there. So I had the opportunity to leave, and I did. But I guess one of the factors too was that it's a very small world in BMX, and a lot of my friends were working with other magazines and stuff. And like Tunney worked with Dig, and there were a lot of magazines at that point, Ride UK, all these others, and I kind of just wanted to be able to like contribute wherever I wanted, I guess,
Okay.
and not feel like there was a little bit of a competition factor. Like I couldn't submit photos to Dig when I worked at Ride, that kind of thing.
Right.
So that had a little to do with it, and then it just worked out that at the time I was able to get in with Primo and Etnies and get a little bit of a deal going monthly where I could like have at least a little bit of a retainer to work off of and do their photos, and then do whatever I wanted beyond that.
Okay. And then, yeah, no, I there's definitely a lot more politics involved than
there are, and you'd think you'd hope there wouldn't be, but I mean, it's almost all politics in action sports at some point, but
yeah,
and it still is, but it just and I understand some of that from the publishing side. Like if I understand Ride's point of view, where my resources should be going to Ride. They're paying my salary, so that makes perfect sense.
right. It's when you're looking at it from the outside and coming up, you want to think that everyone's just happy and getting along and helping each other out, and there is a lot of that, but there's also a lot of the opposite, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, there's definitely some drama that unfolds within the action sports industry, but I think, and I definitely, I will say that at the time, I didn't see eye to eye with Brad and Losi necessarily on how the magazine should be made, and we're friends now, but like it was just it was a little tense at that point. Like ultimately, I think I just like cleaned out my desk at like 1 a.m. or something.
Right.
But
okay.
Yeah, it was just
it was time to go.
Yeah, it was. Well, I tried to, at the time, I tried to give like a month notice or something, a complete issue worth of headway, but it just kind of got weird after that, like as far as like not being in meetings and stuff like that, and just like that I was going to share some sort of proprietary information or something. I don't know.
Right.
But that kind of rubbed me weird, and I just like was like, I can't do this anymore. I just kind of cleaned it out and felt
right.
good.
No, okay. I hear you. So how did you end up in State College?
So I did all that for a couple of years after Ride. I was shooting with Etnies and doing just like all kinds of other magazine contribution stuff. And it's like 2003-ish, everything was a little more internet focused, and the industry was starting to spread out. Like you had like FBM in New York, and Standard in Iowa, and just a lot of the industry wasn't in California anymore, so to speak. So I realized I didn't have to be there, and I was never a SoCal beach person. So when the opportunity came, my wife at the time and I moved back to the East Coast, and our plan was to go back to Boston, or we were going to move to Northampton in Massachusetts. And somehow in that process, we made a trip down to State College for the week to hang out, because I grew up with Kevin Robinson, and his new girlfriend at the time was living with him, and all these dudes lived in State College. Like Kagi had just moved there, Bestwick was there, and there were a couple guys planning to move there. So the long and short was, Kevin, over the course of that week, essentially talked us into moving there, which was a good thing. But it was like, we saw how, Massachusetts isn't particularly cheap. It was cheaper than California. But within that first week, we were kind of loosely looking at houses down there and stuff. And I was like, oh man, like, it's pretty cheap to live here.
Right.
State College itself, being a college town, is kind of expensive for Pennsylvania, but like compared to Southern California and Boston, it was almost free. So the fact that we had friends there, and they were the kind of people that were actually like, had like sponsors that might have some money coming down the road that buy photos and stuff. It just seemed like a good thing to do. And I think ultimately, like, I don't know what road I would have went down if we had moved back to Massachusetts at that point, because I didn't really have a plan for that. It was just like, I didn't want to be in California. We thought the Boston area would be cool. And I don't know if I still would have been like an action sports guy if I had just bought a house in Northampton. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I don't know what you really would have done.
Exactly. I could have shot with like some local guys here and there, but it wouldn't have been career. So, unless I just traveled all the time, which ultimately when I lived in State College, I did travel quite a bit, but there was a built-in.
There was a scene there.
But there was, and it was because of that, I started traveling to more contests, as far as like, I was judging some stuff, and then I would go I got a couple things where I would shoot just photos for the contests themselves, like some of those LG things, and just found ways to get to the contest to essentially hang out with my friends and shoot my friends. But I don't know where I would have ended up if we didn't move to State College, but we stayed there. I stayed there for a little over 4 years, I guess.
Okay. And so what were you doing primarily? Did you have like any sort of steady gig, or were you just kind of freelance?
I did almost all freelance stuff there. I did. So eventually I started doing some design stuff for Woodward, but that was almost like towards the end of when I lived there. I was primarily just doing, freelance photo stuff, and then traveling around and judging, which, paid a little bit of money, but it got me traveling so that when I was out on those trips, I could also piggyback and do like magazine stuff, or maybe get an ad photo for someone. Or so there were, I was hustling for sure, but like there were different avenues to go down essentially.
Right. So which magazines were still around at that point?
At that point, that was mid 2000s. So Dig was still around. Ride UK was still around.
Most of them, I guess.
Freedom. Yeah, I guess all of them at that point were still around.
Were you submitting to Ride at all? Were you, or was that
I didn't do anything to. So Ride, I didn't do anything with until probably, I think it was maybe like 2007 or 8 before I did anything with them again. It just kind of was like, there was some weirdness there. So
okay.
I think I did a couple things for Transworld BMX in that time, because that was Mulligan, and I don't know. Again, it was just like, it was just weird,
just awkward.
So, yeah.
And then so you went from when you went to so when did you end up, and how did you end up in Portland? Well,
so so that would have been, when did I move here? 2007. I was getting divorced, and it was like a weird time in State College. Like there were like 3 people getting divorced, and everyone was kind of friends. So it was like this weird, just like world. And I was like, I kind of just want to get out of here for a minute. Right. And my plan was to there was a Do Tour and something else. There was a do tour in Portland, and there was something else in, I want to say maybe it was X Games or something in LA. So after we sold our house, this was like the same month the do tour was going to be. So I just drove west I was going to hang out here for a while. And ultimately I'm still here. is the long and short of it. Like I really just planned to be here for a short period of time, or, maybe a little while, and then just stay. So, but at the same time, like I was a little burnt out at that point on being in central Pennsylvania. Like, it's great, but I wanted to be back in a place that had some city resources and that kind of thing. And
right.
I knew some people in Portland, and Portland at that time was super cheap and mellow, and it just worked out that was the place to be.
And in Portland, were you doing? So what have you been doing up there? Like, I know you're doing more than just photography. I know that.
Yeah, so at some point in that state college era, I kind of reeled it back in and started doing, because for the years I was at Ride and in California, I was pretty much doing only photo stuff. And when I moved to state college, I realized like I wanted to be doing design stuff as well, not just design stuff, but I wanted to be doing both. So at that point, I kind of focused a little more on doing a split of both. And since then, I have been doing more of a split. But so I started doing, towards the end of living in state college, I started doing a lot of stuff for Woodward, who was, the camps were growing and they were building all these other properties, and there was a lot happening. So I was doing like catalogs and logos for all kinds of different stuff. And I did that pretty regularly up until like the last few years. A lot of stuff has changed at Woodward because they got bought by a much larger company. But yeah, I did that for probably 10 or 12 years, just doing a lot of stuff for them. I did a magazine with John Parker and Paul Zitzer, the skateboarder. We did this a magazine called Sophisticated Rider, which the name seems a little wacky, but it was essentially, that's what it was. It was like for guys like us that were like a little bit older and interested in like all the different action sports
things.
aspects.
It's kind of,
it was almost like
Action
the
Now.
do tour magazine, sort of like, because the initial premise of doing it, I think, was the do tour was getting launched, and part of doing that magazine was to work a little bit alongside that, because they had all the motocross, skate, BMX.
Yeah, it kind of almost reminded me of, because I remember seeing something about you guys doing that, and it reminded me sort of like, kind of like Action. You remember that Action Now magazine, or
yep,
like that, just kind of, in the sense that it wasn't super specific to BMX or skate, or
and that was the idea. I mean, and then those were certainly like those kind of magazines were things we looked at as inspiration, I guess.
I was gonna say a more mature version of like Homeboy magazine.
yeah. But there was all kinds of variety of stuff in there, but it was a little like some of the stuff we did that I couldn't do other places. Like we did an article back then on concussions, which a lot of people steered clear of because people just didn't talk about it.
Right.
So we did like some more in-depth stuff like that, I guess. And then like the interviews were a little older focused, I guess, as far as like the material they covered and that sort of thing. But it's just, with any kind of magazine like that, it's tough to get the audience and stuff, because you're pretty diverse in your content, and then advertising stuff because you're, again, not super niche. So
right.
I don't know. We did 7 of those.
And was that all kind of self-funded and produced?
I mean, we got a little bit of actor, but I mean, Parker funded a lot of it, honestly. Like it really was his baby, so to speak. And then John Parker and I, at the time, Parker was living in State College and we were good friends, and he wanted to do this magazine. And I was like, all right, well, I'm not going to let you just lay this thing out in Microsoft Paint or something, like
Yeah.
let's make it pretty good. So, and I genuinely like making magazines. So for me, it was like an outlet at the time, like I said, because I did want to do more design again. So it was, I didn't get any money doing it, but it was another thing to do. And, just
Right.
area.
And
And
so,
again, it's another place to put photos and
yeah.
reason to be.
And then, so you're also, so Ransom Six,
Yep.
is that just, so tell me about that. What it was.
So that's, I realized that whole thing is a little confusing. So, so for a number of years, I was working on a online snowboard community, and we had an apparel line with it. And Ransom Six ultimately was started as a way to make the apparel that we were selling for that, like direct to consumer. Like I like all the areas of design and screen printing, and like I'm a really hands-on person. So I built this little shop that we could like print all our own stuff and do some of the like sewing of tags and that kind of stuff. And then ultimately that kind of expanded, and I did like some more of my own products with that. But then I got out of the snowboard side of it, and I had this shop that I was just kind of tinkering in. So that's, at this point, that's a small brand, and I do all my studio stuff under that guise essentially. So
Okay.
that's like,
no,
it's a little bit my studio, a little bit of brand. It's
kind of like an umbrella to do whatever you want to
exactly.
do. You put
I guess that's the point. Like the point is to be able to do whatever.
Right. With a name and tie it all together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I again, it's something I never really had a plan for, and I have a couple of like. There's a jacket that we do that was like one of the things I wanted to like get the sewing side figured out, because I had that jacket that I wanted to make, and so it's a little bit of an outlet, a product design thing, and
it's an excuse to make shit.
Yeah, exactly. It really is, and
yeah,
because I am like I hate that. I hate the word maker, because it's like such a like this thing. Like I just expect it to be like someone chiseling some shit out of wood, but it's I mean, I guess I do, and all of that comes from BMX, right? Like just the interest in screen printing, and all that from like you did it as well, like just making shirts as a kid, and I wanted to learn how to do that, and then like the design thing evolved out of that. It was like, okay, like how can I get to this phase of it, and and I still like the tactile screen, like the act of screen printing and making stuff that way. It definitely. Working as a job kind of becomes factory work, right?
Well, right. No, I relate totally. I actually just purchased a little silkscreen kit. I want to get back into make some shirts myself, just because it's fun,
It is. It really is.
And it's not the most efficient or economical way to do it, but it's enjoyable.
Exactly. So. Yeah, it is. Like it's another outlet. It's just like an art thing, and we do have like so. With Ransom Six, I do have. It's like I have a small cut and sew shop, which is just like some industrial sewing machines, and then the screen printing stuff, which I could do. I could print some stuff for people, but it's just then
it's a whole nother deal.
Exactly. Yeah. So I don't know, but I love having that stuff. It's like because I love all those different.
And you can play. Aspects. You can just say, "Oh, I just want to try this design," and try it. You can print one or two. If you're not feeling it, you can just abandon it. You didn't just get a box full of shirts.
Exactly. And the nice thing for me too is I think this also comes from the DIY nature of like BMX, skate, like even music and things like that. Like I like to have my hands in all this stuff, and not only just learning it, but being able to do it. So for now, I I find myself, I gravitate towards like the smaller brands and stuff I'm working on, which isn't always necessarily the best financial decision. But having these resources allows me to do like a lot of the different aspects of design projects I'm working on. So,
right. No, I hear you. So what?
Whenever possible, I like to do as many of the different aspects as I can.
So are you just so because a lot, I mean, a lot of what I'm talking about is sort of like, you know, entrepreneurial stuff, like just to, but it's not fully 100% focused on that. It's more about getting, you know, just doing your own thing and making your own rules kind of idea, like, you know, living the way you want to live. But I'm curious to know, what's your main, for lack of a better word, business? Are you mostly, or is it just kind of spread across all different things?
Yes, it is. So primarily at this point, probably design work. But so we have a couple different like small brands we do out of the studio. Like I have a line of like a small line of like home goods. We make like leather plant holders and stuff with my girlfriend. Okay. So a few different little piecemeal projects like that I do, like Ransom Six being one of them.
Yeah.
And then freelance design work for various clients.
And is that just under your name, or is there a studio name? Is it Ransom Six?
So in the last couple of years, I've been doing everything under Ransom Six, but prior to that, I just did all my design work under my own name.
Okay.
But within the last few years, like now I just put everything under the same Ransom Six umbrella. But yeah, I mean, I guess from an income standpoint, it's been pretty split between design and photo, which the nice thing is it, like every industry goes like up and down, you know, and there'll be like times when one of those is better than the other. So it kind of helps to have both, really.
Yeah, no, I fully understand. Are you working in all like different industries, or is it primarily focused in action sports still, or is it kind of?
I guess I don't do a whole lot of action sports, other than I still do some. People hit me up for like photo stuff, to like Challenger and little public like Dig will hit me up for photo here and there. But primarily, I'm not doing a ton of action sports stuff. I do Woodward was kind of the last like big one I was working with.
Okay.
So nowadays I do like up here. There's a lot of weed stuff, so there's like CBD stuff.
Yeah.
I shot some like golf gear last week. It really is all over the board.
Okay.
I work with some of the local agencies sometimes on various different projects, but yeah, the action sports thing isn't really. It's not by design that I'm not doing a ton of it. I just kind of.
It's kind of the way it goes. Like, yeah, once you stop really being in the heart of it, and if you know, people get older and you're not, you know. It's a
lot of the people that we, both you and I probably worked with or alongside, like a lot of them either aren't in the industry anymore. A lot of them are dead. Like they're just like, so it's just like the work just doesn't flow in.
Yeah.
Just inherently anymore.
Right.
I mean, for years I could just like, a lot of the work just came to me, right? Like the photo stuff. So now it's just like a little bit of a different situation, but it's still just working on little stuff.
And the people, I mean, and the people I think we know that are still involved aren't necessarily involved on the business side. They're just still involved for the, I don't know, for the love of it, I guess, you know, like there's, I think they're most of them are still riding in one sense or another, but not necessarily on a pro level. Or
I guess the times I do shoot is with like when I'm out with, when it's guys I'm friends with that I'm riding with and we're just having fun, you know, which is how it was in the beginning. Like it's just shooting your homies.
Kind of come full circle.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was gonna say a few years ago you were doing a lot of you're doing some portrait stuff. I know you did some stuff with Hoffman
Yeah,
and
I mean,
some other
I've
guys.
shot all kinds of stuff over the years. Like I did for a long time. I was doing like a lot of the bike builders in town. I was shooting a lot of their stuff because there's those all those like custom uh, road bikes and stuff like that.
Oh yeah.
So just shooting these fancy custom one-off bikes here and there. I do like portraits here and there. I've actually been wanting to shoot more of that stuff. I was thinking about that the other day. Just like I've got a studio here, so why not, right? Yeah, I don't know. I actually like just doing this book like got me more stoked to shoot photos, I guess,
Yeah.
which is a good thing. But yeah, it's again, this year has been so weird to begin with. It's like,
Yeah.
you can't just like call randos and have them come by to shoot necessarily. I mean,
Right. Yeah. It's definitely been a different year.
Yeah, we'll see where it goes. But yeah, action sports wise, I still have some involvement in the snowboard brand we did still operates over in Korea randomly. So
Yeah. I didn't really ask you about that because I was curious about how all that came. I didn't realize. Were you big into snowboarding, or was that just kind of like something that came about?
I snowboarded a little bit back in New England, and then just a little bit over the years. But so my girlfriend at the time was a snowboarder, and we just I was in it a little more as like the media guy, like the guy that knew how to like make the stuff work.
Yeah.
From a publishing end.
Okay.
But also, I understood snowboarding enough, I think, to be a part of it. But I'm certainly not a
right. But you get the basic idea. You know what's a good.
Yeah. And I can
know what's a good shot and what's not.
Yeah. And I shoot it when the time comes, and made a lot of videos and stuff for that. But for me, the side I liked was really like, again, like I like the back end side of the media and just like the ability to do like your own thing,
right?
Produce content. But then, as everything evolved, it's just at some point a few years ago, like everything just became branded content, and it really changes things as far as what you're creating and how you're creating it. It got a little sour for me, I guess.
Right. I hear you.
But that all kind of, I was involved in that with an ex-girlfriend, and that kind of turned into a big clusterfuck. And
yeah, that could make things complicated.
And the challenge was that we had a brand with it, like we had sort of like how Thrasher has all their soft goods. We did our own line of stuff, and it started doing really well. And that's the side I was stoked on, because that's why we built the screen printing shop and like all that shit. And when that all fizzled, it was like, oh, okay. So I don't know.
Spending your life doing all these different things, action sports, photography, freelance, different businesses. What do you think is what did you learn from the non-business side of stuff that might have helped you in the business end of things, as far as just kind of general lessons that might have helped
one of the
keep you going?
You probably get a little of this too. Like, I mean, you start out like going to art school or being in a punk band or whatever, because you're a little bit like, I went to art school because I didn't want to be a business guy, right?
Right. Yeah.
And
the
then,
irony. Yeah.
The irony really is like, you all of a sudden that's what you have to do, in a sense, because
they don't tell you that though.
No, I mean, there's no point in school where we really even talked about. I mean, they do a little bit, like they allude to the fact that you're going to have to make money, right? But
yeah,
the real business side of it, you don't really understand until later, and you're like, shit, like I don't want to do this, but I have to. um, and
I've,
it's
yeah, I've
it's
often
just
said if
like
I,
you learn by default. Like you have to learn.
yeah,
And I think, one of the bigger things that I got out of it that they didn't teach me in school was that for someone who's a photographer, if you say you take a job like I did at a magazine, you're getting a salary, so they ultimately own that work.
yeah.
So one of the things I
Work for hire, is that what
work for
that's?
hire is another
Yeah,
thing that
yeah,
I always stay clear of. But um, just after working at the magazine, I realized, oh shit, like I'm not. So that stuff isn't.
you,
It's just gone, kind of.
yeah,
And then now, like those magazines are owned by. Well, they're owned by David Pecker, who's the National Enquirer owner. So he's like some crazy right wing dude. So I have this 2 years of my life that this guy owns, and I just have no access to, essentially.
yeah,
Which is a way to, I'm glad I learned it that early on. That I think it made me think more about like the ownership aspect
yeah.
creatively. Um, it, it, editorially, but also like that stuff taught me a lot going into the advertising side of it, where you're dealing with more money. But just making sure that I have some ownership over my own work down the line, I guess. That was one big learning point for me.
Right. And as far as, so, I mean, you've been, what's the count now? Like, how many years has it been since you've had to go into and sit in a cubicle in the fluorescent lights?
I have fluorescent lights in my studio, so, but
you have a choice.
Yeah, I can turn them off. I guess so. 2001, so almost 20 years. Yeah, and I mean, we've mentioned some of the things, but there's been a lot of stuff in there along that time. Like for a couple of years, I did some work for ASA, who did all those LG contests. So I was, working with and for them on certain things. So it wasn't as if I didn't have
a gig.
Yeah, it was just they were a little more flexible, and I was doing that work at my shop and not theirs, that kind of thing.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I guess from as far as learning too, I mean, one big factor is if you can have some kind of primary client or just some kind of anchor that gives you a little bit of money,
right?
That's
a good. It's a good setup. I agree. Like I have a similar situation, and it makes it possible to do other things. But at the same time, I get, for a while I had like three main clients I was working for, like big clients, and I was always afraid that, or actually it was really only two. I was, if I lost one of them, I was screwed. So that's a scary part too. So I started creating my own, I have a wedding business now too. That's not, it's not my dream, but it's a source of income I can pull from, and I can turn it up or down as much as I kind of need to.
Right.
So you have to have different income streams, really, and you can't. So having that a good steady client is huge, but you can't just sit back and rely on them, I guess.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah. And one thing that I got to see living out by Woodward is just how much with them they have the gymnastic stuff and the BMX stuff and the skate stuff and cheerleading, and there'd be periods where like a couple years or a year where cheerleading's really dead or gymnastics is really dead, but BMX is on the uptick. And
right.
Skateboarding. So like seeing a lot of that and how that worked was kind of gave me the impression I was on the right track, I guess, with that stuff.
Yeah.
Because they'd be, if gymnastics was dead, they still had skateboarding to crush it,
Right.
So that's always been my goal, is to have a bunch of little things lined up along the way, so that I can at least have something to do. Also, like, I mean, with photo stuff especially, like, there's sometimes you'll license a photo and make a shitload of money, and then there's other periods where you're selling a few photos to magazine or whatever and not making much. So I would have to plan that out, like, if I had a year where I made good money, don't spend it.
Right. Yeah. It took me a few years to figure that out, how to kind of just estimate and, average out over the year. It takes a couple of years. Like, okay, I think I can say I can kind of give myself this much money every month and be safe, that even if I don't pull in some work for a couple of months, I'll be all right. But yeah,
then you got to deal with, like, invoicing and
the taxes,
getting paid, and, like, you spend I've spent countless hours chasing down $200,
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like, but I guess you got to, or I don't know.
So do you think it's worth it though, or
yeah, like, I mean, I don't, like, it's weird because most of my direct job experiences I see are like other people's at this point. But I do think it's worth it. I think I have a lot of flexibility, and but man, it's, you probably have the same feeling, but it's definitely stressful a lot. Like, you're kind of, number one, you're constantly going, which is a little bit intense, and just figuring out, like, what to do next, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I feel I have my days, but I mean, right now I would say, if you're able to do something else, like for me, if I knew how to do anything else that was of value that someone would pay me for, I may very well be in a steady job. But the things that I know how to do, the jobs that are out there, they just don't pay very well. So I have to kind of string together all these different little things that I can do to make a decent living. And
I mean, I've definitely thought that too. Like, you look at, like, okay, like, if I got this job, I'd make X amount of money. Well, I'm already making that, like, doing this. So it's like, do I want to give up these things for that?
And the freedom.
Yeah, exactly.
And my personality is just that I can't, I have a hard time people telling me where I need to be spending my time. Like, I can't wrap my head around being an adult and having to ask permission to do something.
Sure.
And I know that's not quote unquote normal, but I don't know. It's just, it's hard for me.
I've realized that I just get, like, when I'm working on something, I get I get kind of tunnel visioned on that. And, like, when there's a bunch of people around asking me questions or telling me to do, it just gets all,
right.
Who knows?
Come sit in this meeting that has nothing to do with you for 6 hours. And
that's the other thing too. Like, I have friends that are in corporate gigs, and essentially they just email each other all day long. I kind of want to do something. Right.
Exactly. It seems like a lot of communications about things that never actually take place.
Yeah, exactly. But it's like any self-employment. It's got its ups and downs for sure.
Right. Any advice to anyone that you might give, or any kind of last words on that topic?
Oh man. I guess if you're gonna do the self-employment thing, just make sure you're passionate about something. Like, find something that you can have that tunnel focus on, because you're gonna have to. You wouldn't want to just pick something out of the blue and just kind of go randomly doing it. Like, for me, BMX was just all I really had in my head. So once it became a job, it was like, oh, cool. Like, that's all I have to think about now.
Right.
So I think, I don't know, I don't know if I ever would have gone down that road if it weren't for BMX and the related action sports, you know, like, I don't know how I would have gotten to this point, because I'd probably just be working in a design department or ad agency, or who knows. And not that there's anything wrong with either of those,
Right.
but
And that might
it's
have
just
been
so different.
Yeah, and I think that kind of brings up a. I mean, I'm going to let you go here soon, but I just wanted to say I think that brings up a point where definitely start off with something that you're full on board and into, and then that thing may not actually pay the bills, but it may direct you towards something that may not be your first choice, but it's close enough that will make things happen for you, like financially, so that you can kind of do the other things that you love just for the hell of doing them too, you know?
Yeah. And I think there's like,
there's a way to balance.
There's a way to make money like everywhere, I guess, but like, you just have to.
Doesn't come right away always.
Of course. Yeah. And you're going to bust. Like, I mean, I work a lot, I guess, you know, even if I'm not doing anything, even if I'm not working on someone's project, I'm like kind of working. Like, I'm always just like,
it's always,
so
your mind's always going.
Yeah. Or
thinking
I'm
about
just doing something for myself or whatever.
Right.
Like, I mean, that book just sort of happened inadvertently, and it took me like, I spent probably 6 months just doing that, or somewhere in that neighborhood, just doing that. Like, once you're in that, like, you're not really focused on anything else. Like, everything around you is just like, nope, don't care.
Right.
And it just, like, the only reason I got that done was because the city was shut down with the pandemic, you know? So
right. And then some things like this, like you know, passion projects or personal projects, if you don't treat them with the respect that you would treat something that was paying, a lot of times they're never going to actually get done, or
right.
And
right.
Or not the way you want them to.
Right. And that's,
So.
Yeah, I mean, I thought a lot about that doing the book. Is like, how would that even work if someone was paying me to do it? Like, I don't know. Like, first of all, who was going to pay me to do it? And second of all, like, would I be able to work on it the same way I was? I don't think so. I think it would, you'd get to a certain point where you just burn out. I don't know.
Dude, this book.
It was, I had no plans to even, I definitely had no plans to make a BMX book going into it. And it wasn't a BMX book until probably like 5 months of just like tinkering around and moving shit in an InDesign file.
Dude, it's really, I didn't realize how thick of a book this was going to be. It's really amazing that you have, there's a lot of great photos in here. They're all really good photos.
Well, it was fun. It was, again, the excuse to use some of that old stuff and go back. Like, for me, it started as an archiving project. I just wanted to put names and places to different old photos I took while I could still remember. And then I guess looking at a lot of that early New England stuff, like, kind of made me get further into it, because I was like, oh, this stuff is still pretty cool. And then I am a total like junkie for documentaries and any weird little subculture, right? Like, that I don't know anything about. Even the other night, I watched a documentary on that Pastafari religion, which is all based on some like flying spaghetti monster.
Okay.
This is a real thing, and you should watch it. It's on Amazon right now.
Okay.
So these people wear colanders on their heads for hats, and like, there's this whole thing. But you get into it. The further you get into it, you realize that it's like, what they're doing is no more ridiculous to them than what anybody else is doing. And
religion in general, I guess. Yeah.
Like, okay, that's a colander on his head. Like, I have a hat on my head. Is that any different? I don't know. But so I watch all kinds of shit like that, and just like, you know, anything people are super into. And going through those photos, I was like, oh man, like, I never really thought about that old BMX world as like a bizarre subculture because I was doing it.
Right.
But to anyone who would come up on us like in a parking lot, what the hell are these kids doing?
Dude.
They're in my way. Like they're by themselves spinning around. These are like 20-something-year-old men spinning around in a parking lot. Like it's got to look stupid. But so going through the photos, yeah, I was like, man, I started looking at it more like that, I guess, like trying to not necessarily trying not to make a BMX magazine, but make a book that was somewhere between like an art book and a BMX book, and to show some of that like weird element.
I love the Pigpen photos just because, I mean, that reminds me of, I mean, you know, flatlanding in a parking lot's one thing, but then you kooky kids out in the middle of this random lot that's in between people's, I mean, that must have been someone's property, obviously.
Right, yeah.
And you know, going out there and digging these, you know, it just must have looked ridiculous to anyone who would walk through there. I remember trying to find that place. Just
I know. I can't even put in. I can't even fathom where that place really was. Honestly.
I ended up there. I had some gig shooting some, you know, I don't know. I was shooting a bunch of Yelp videos at some point, and I had a gig down in the area, and I ended up, and I recognized, I'm like, holy shit, I think I'm near Pigpen. And somehow I ended up finding the street, and then you would park and go through this little hole. I actually found it. And there was a couple, it looked like it had been written within the last 5 years, like someone had been in there doing stuff. But it wasn't current.
That it's like kind of operating still, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Someone commented on a photo that I posted saying that they had been there and it was like still running a little bit.
Yeah.
But looking back at that stuff, like some of those photos they're not my best photos from a photographic standpoint, but the photo of like all those dudes like under a jump or under the jump,
their hands
up in the air, like it's just like it's cool to see all those different people and like what they're wearing, and
I'm looking at that photo right now. Is that Dick Day in the air?
I'm pretty sure it is. I have it labeled as Dick Day, but I couldn't. That was one that I couldn't fully be sure of, but it wasn't. It appeared to be Dick Day. Okay. So someone might correct me on that, but
yeah, it looks like him. I haven't seen him. I haven't seen him in years.
I haven't seen him since probably back in.
Yeah, I ran into him. I ran into him after Pigpen, like maybe a year later or so. He was going to school at NYU, and I went down to visit my sister, and I ran into him like in the food, the fuck's it called? The caf, basically.
Cafeteria,
yeah, the cafeteria. And I happened to have my bike with me, and we went out and rode Brooklyn Banks at like 2 a.m. And I think that was the last time I saw him. That was probably like 93 or 4 or something.
Right. And I think he stayed in New York because I think because I know Ali Ziegler, who was our art director at Ride, was living in New York when she was with him. So
that's crazy. Yeah.
But it's weird. That's the other side of going through those photos is you kind of, it's a where are they now sort of situation.
Yeah. Well, the book's awesome. All right, so I have number 219 of 250, I believe. Are you going to print more?
The like I said, there was no plan, but the original idea was not to. But a lot of people have asked, and the short answer is I don't know. It may
maybe do a different cover or something.
I think that's what's going to happen. Is it'll probably get done as a different cover and maybe like slightly different. Like a little shorter or something. Yeah. But just to make it, I'd like to keep that one as like a collector's edition, you know?
Yeah. Well, fucking great now that I opened it.
I also, I had no gauge for whether or not anyone was going to want it, you know?
Right.
So it was pretty intense, like pulling the trigger to print them. But, because I didn't tell anyone the whole time I was putting it together that I was doing it. So I didn't know if anyone was going to want it, care, or because it was so expensive to print. Like,
yeah, it must have been.
I wanted to make it like pretty. I wanted to make it worth people's while because it ultimately ended up costing $84, and like there wasn't really any gauge for whether people would pay that, I guess, for a mid-school BMX book, you know.
Right.
So I was pretty terrified I was going to have a wall of books in my office, but
I understand.
it sold quicker than I expected. But I had no concept of what was going to happen there. But if we did do another version, I would like to make it more accessible, but also like plan it out a little bit. Like I didn't think about, like, oh shit, like what if people, because it's a 5-pound book,
right?
So it costs a fortune to ship to like Europe, anywhere else. And I had a lot of interest from all over, and it blew me away how many people still bought it based on the fact that it was going to cost, say $85 to ship it to them.
Right.
But I mean, it's awesome that they did, but I also feel bad that it would have been nice if it was planned to have like a European distributor or something to alleviate some of that. But again, there was no planning, and shipping costs a fortune. But yeah, people, I mean, some of them literally spent more for shipping than they did on the book. So,
yikes. Yeah, I don't know how any of that works. Luckily, I mean, my biggest investment was to print some DVDs, which at the time seemed like a lot of money, but that couldn't be anything close to what it cost to,
No, it was pricey. It was a little bit of a little bit nerve wracking. So
yeah,
I think the first copies I got, I went by Goods, which is the bike shop here in Portland, and Shad Johnson, who owns it, and this dude Snotty, who's actually from Nashua. I don't know if you ever met him. But,
I think so.
Chris Morse. Snotty lives out here, and those two saw it. And were like, holy shit, this is going to sell out fast. And I was like, what? Like, you think people are going to actually buy it? And they did. So
yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it's a legit book. It's no joke. Like it's not a zine, that's for sure. So,
right. Yeah, I wanted to make something that was like, if I just got hit by a car tomorrow or something, there would be some sort of trace. There's this like thing that I did, which was a lot of that old stuff. So something to have as a historical sort of monument. Plus there was my entire archive was a shit show, and I had no rhyme or reason to any of it. So if I did just die, like that stuff would all just be in a box and in like total disarray. So it was cool to get a little bit of order to that. And it's still in total disarray. There's some stuff.
Some of it's organized. Least,
all of the stuff that's in that book is cataloged well.
Right.
So I don't know, but it was ultimately it was really fun to do. So who knows? Maybe I'll do. And I still have, there's shitloads of photos that didn't end up in that book. So
right.
Who knows with them? But
yeah, are you doing any sort of like prints to go along? Like have you thought about doing any of that? Or
I have, and I've been experimenting with some of that. Like I just started printing some of my stuff like larger format. Like I made some like 40 by 60 prints pretty recently.
Yeah.
To get into experimenting more with the like art side of that stuff. I have a printer and I've printed work for my studio, but I've never really sold prints, and I never really did them for any sort of reason. But now just looking back at them, there's like some that I want to do things with. My initial goal, once I sent this thing to the printer months ago, was I was like, oh, we'll just do a photo show around it when it shows up, and release it like that. But then
right,
that was months ago, and who knows when that could happen. So I'd still like to do that at some point.
Yeah,
but
maybe
the short answer is yes, I have thought about doing the print side, and I don't know what that's going to amount to, but
well, I think that that's something you could do with a little bit less upfront investment.
Yeah, I also the one thing about it is I don't want to just piss out a bunch of prints and have like zillions of things everywhere. Like I'd like there to be a little bit of uh, exclusivity might be the wrong word, but just like, at least limit them in some way so that
You
there's
make them
not
special
six.
in some way. Yeah.
Yeah, but we'll see. I mean, I think it'll happen at some point. And there's definitely some that I'd like to offer prints of at some point.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. I think
there are. I mean, I don't know. There aren't a whole lot of prints of this stuff out there, so that's part of why I included the postcards that came with the book, like just so there was like a little other piece to the puzzle, I guess.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think you definitely made something cool here. And I want to let you know that the stain on the back trips me out every time I look at it. I'm just right now when I was talking to you, I was like, did I just fucking put my cup on there?
A few people have told me that they thought one dude said he was bummed because at first he was bummed at first because he thought he got like a stained like second or something. But that was a long time thing I wanted to do. Like I had tried in various projects for other people to put coffee stains on shit, and it always got nixed. And when I was doing this, I was like putting the coffee stain on it. So
I mean, it definitely looks real.
Yeah. I mean, it is.
I know it's
technically real, but it's just scanned, But that was. I guess the idea was to like give a little bit of tongue in cheek, like just put this on your coffee table and have it out and
right.
Stuff on.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah, I'm glad it fooled a few people at least. I don't know.
That's awesome. Well, I'm gonna let you go, but just while I have you on, I want to publicly thank you again and acknowledge the fact that you sent me the Generation F book. Years ago, which came out of left field, and I couldn't have been more thankful for that.
Oh, good. Yeah, those were a hot commodity. I think at some point around one of the old school reunions, Mark Luman lives in town here, and he came across like a stash that Nike had in a storage unit or something, and was like, make sure these get in the hands of like people that are going to appreciate it, So,
well, thank you for thinking of me.
Down to that old school reunion and got them to people that would hold on to them. Yeah, those things at first ended up in half of them ended up on eBay because a lot of them just went to shoe collectors and stuff. So
yeah, that's a weird one.
I mean, I get it. It's especially now having done it, it's an expensive project to do, and
right,
just putting down the money. But yeah, it was cool to bring those down to that old school reunion because like a lot of those dudes had never gotten one, and these are like legit dudes, like that we all looked up to as kids, and we're probably even in the book. So
right, definitely. But yeah, I was, thank you for thinking of me.
Yeah. Sure.
Do you want to plug anything on the way out? Is there like where can people go check out your work, that type of thing?
Yeah. My studio site is just ransom6.com. The word six spelled out. Ransom, like you are holding someone for ransom. And then I don't know, like I don't really have anything else to plug per se other than the stuff.
Maybe should have asked you this previously, but is there anything else that you wanted to add in that we haven't touched on? Or
the only thing, no, I think that's pretty much it. The only thing I was thinking when we were talking early on about how the early photo stuff, the one thing I will say is that I think it almost becomes crucial to have like those people that are kind of along for the ride with you. Like if there's, whether you're shooting like bands or skateboarders or BMX, like we were talking about that photo of Kevin that was like one of my first published photos. And I think having those people that are kind of coming up when you're shooting, you're kind of like you were talking about before, like working together. But without that, it would be tough to get anywhere, like
right.
Just going out as like a a dude like if I was like, I'm going to shoot BMX, like it would be weird to just approach people at a skate park or whatever.
Right.
But to have this group of friends that's coming up and you're working alongside of them, I think that's ultimately like why it worked, because there were so many of those of our friends that were good bike riders that at the same time I was trying to do something with photography, they were trying to get exposure. So,
and you were a rider first, so it wasn't like you were.
I was, yeah, and so I understood that side of it. And
Yeah.
that's why I was friends with them. But yeah, I think like
and
ultimately you sort of need that like that one guy who's going to be a super pro, you know, or for lack of a better term. But and for me, that at that time that was Kevin, who was like one of my best friends and was getting sponsored. And I think without those people, I don't know how you really get out there.
Right. And I would add that I think that, that can be tough. I think if you're sincere and you let them know that you're really you are trying to help them and not just poach off them, then, people will come around and like, in the end, hopefully thank you for, that. Cause it's similar with band photos, without those photographers, when I was in a band, without the photographers, we wouldn't have had anything to lay out a record with,
Right. Well, and now looking back, you see that stuff on social media 20 years later or something, like someone stoked that they were at whatever show or.
Yeah. And I think it's similar as long as they don't think as long as you're not, as long as you're respectful and you communicate with them and I mean, try to make friends, the first too, don't just go up and start shooting. Cause I remember trying to shoot, BMX, like, video BMX stuff without really knowing like I remember going down to, I went down to Posh, like by myself before I knew anyone, before I knew any of you guys. And I have footage of like Joe Rich and Lucky, but it was a contest. So it wasn't like I just showed up at the trails on a normal day. So I had that excuse, but yeah, I mean, that would be weird not knowing.
Yeah, it is weird. They're sort of just like that. Who's that guy pointing a camera at us and what is he going to do with that stuff?
Exactly. So yeah, so there's definitely ways to go about it that, and you don't know that, like as a kid, like I may have done that, if I didn't know better. And then, because you just want to, you want a good subject.
Yeah. Well, and maybe, if someone's outgoing enough, maybe just being persistent like that is a good.
Could be. Yeah.
But I'm not like that person that's going to do that. So.
Right. I think like I think you're right though. Like there's you got to work together. You can't take BMX photos or skate photos. I mean, you need a subject. And they have to be doing something relatively decent usually.
And I think that's ultimately why I shoot less of it now, just because for decades, really, it was like kind of the same people that
you don't want to be the creepy old guy who just shows up at the skate park.
It is a little weird. Yeah.
Shoot the 15-year-old kids that are
you do start going on trips and you're like, man, the first time I ever really thought about that, I was with Zach Warden had moved to State College when I was living there, and he was 16 and he moved there to finish his last year of high school, and Kevin was his legal guardian. And we went snowboarding together one day, and he was talking about something or some girl he was talking about. And I was like, Zach, what are you doing? And I was like, oh shit, he's 16. Like, it wasn't like he was creepy and old. He was just a high school kid.
Right.
But you lose all of, like, when you're doing something like, or on a BMX trip and everybody's focused on riding bikes, like a lot of that age kind of thing goes away at certain points.
Yep.
And sometimes in those social situations, you're like, oh man. Yep.
Oh yeah, that can get weird for sure. Well, I'm going to let you go. Yeah. Thanks for doing this, man. It was a great conversation.
Thank you.
And hopefully I'll talk to you again soon.
Yeah, it was good to hear from you.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jared Souney. I hope you've enjoyed this first 10 episodes as much as I've enjoyed making them. I'm really excited to bring you the next few. Next week, we have Brian Melville from the band Eyelid, and we're going to have Bill Conway from the Hard Times. And next is artist and graphic designer John Contino. I think after that, we're going to have Robbie Morales of Cult Bikes. If you haven't yet, please leave us a rating and review in iTunes or Spotify or wherever you happen to be listening to this. Definitely helps a lot. Also, don't forget to check out our 6-part docuseries, Don't Stand a Line, which is up for purchase or rental. You can learn more about that on our website, codecprojects.com. And there's the chainsaw in the background, so I'm out. I will see you next week.